Jessica was an experienced waitress who had already worked at dozens of weddings all over the city. But the event that night was different, very special. It was a wedding at one of the most luxurious hotels in the region, with impeccable decor, exotic food, and elegantly dressed guests. Jessica knew she would have to be at her best to serve everyone with the same attention and efficiency. She arrived early, along with the team, to ensure that everything was ready for the arrival of the newlyweds and guests. She put on her impeccable uniform, fixed her hair, and applied a discreet makeup. After all, she could not draw more attention than the newlyweds themselves. As she finished arranging the last tables, Jessica watched the guests start to arrive. Some seemed anxious, others radiant. She imagined what it must be like to be in the place of those newlyweds, dreaming of the wedding day for the rest of their lives. She sighed, remembering that her own wedding had been many years ago and that, unfortunately, her husband Ricardo was no longer with them. "Hey, Jessica! Come help here with this bouquet, please," yelled one of her colleagues, snapping her out of her daydreams. Jessica straightened her apron and went to lend a hand, ready for another intense night of work, but certain that she would do everything with the utmost attention and care. Jessica was a woman with incredible strength. After losing her beloved husband Ricardo in a tragic car accident a few years ago, she had to fend for herself to support the household and care for the family. It wasn't easy, but Jessica was determined and worked hard every day to provide the best for her loved ones. She woke up early, dropped the children off at school, and then rushed to work as a waitress. Even after an exhausting day, she still had the energy to make dinner, help the children with their homework, and ensure that everything was in order at home. Some nights, Jessica went to bed late at night, after finishing all the household chores. But she never complained, always maintaining a smile on her face. "Mom, you shouldn't work so hard. Let me take care of the house today," her eldest daughter, Louisa, would say with concern. Jessica would just smile and caress the girl's hair. "It's okay, my love. Your mother is strong, she can handle everything. You are my strength." And it was true. Jessica drew strength from her family to move forward. Despite the difficulties, she was determined to provide the best for her children. They were all that was left for her after Ricardo was gone. That's why Jessica worked tirelessly, whether at luxury weddings or small local events. She knew that every penny counted and she would do everything to ensure a better future for her family. Jessica rushed from one side to the other, ensuring that everything was perfect for the arrival of the guests. She and her team had worked hard all week to transform that beautiful event hall into a fairy tale setting. The tables were impeccably arranged, with white tablecloths, shiny plates and cutlery. The floral arrangements, with red roses and white lilies, added a special touch. Jessica had reviewed the menu 1,000 times with the chef to ensure that the food was delicious. "Folks, let's go. The guests should arrive any moment now. Check if the glasses are full and if the beverage and canopy services are ready," Jessica ordered, keeping the team focused. She herself checked the last details, adjusting the position of a vase and straightening a crumpled napkin. Everything had to be perfect. After all, it was the wedding of one of the wealthiest families in the city. "Hey, Jessica, have you seen how beautiful the bride is? She looks like a princess," commented one of her colleagues, watching the bride arrive at the hall. Jessica smiled and nodded, but deep down she felt a pang of sadness. She remembered her own wedding to Ricardo, when he looked at her with so much love. Those times seemed so distant now. "All right, folks. Time to work." She called everyone's attention, determined to ensure that this event was a success. After all, it was her livelihood. Dinner was already in full swing, the guests eating and drinking enthusiastically. Jessica circulated between the tables, clearing empty plates and checking that the glasses were always full. She hardly had time to breathe, but she didn't complain. This is how she earned a living and supported her family. Suddenly, her eyes rested on a table at the back of the hall. There was the groom, laughing and chatting with his friends. Jessica felt her heart race. That face, that smile. She knew those features well. It couldn't be. Ricardo, she murmured, unable to believe it. Her husband, whom she had buried years ago after the tragic car accident, was there, alive and well. But how? How was that possible? Jessica was paralyzed, her hands trembling and her face turning white as wax. She couldn't take her eyes off that man she loved so much and thought she had lost forever. "Hey, Jessica, are you okay?" A colleague poked her, concerned about her reaction. Jessica blinked, trying to return to reality. She couldn't draw attention, let alone cause a scene. She took a deep breath and forced a smile. Yes. I'm fine. Sorry, I think I got distracted for a moment," she lied, her heart racing. But her eyes kept going back, every now and then, to the groom's table. That man was Ricardo, she was sure of it. But how? Why was he there, pretending to be someone else? 1,000 questions swirled in her head, leaving her completely distraught. Jessica felt her heart pounding a mile a minute. Her eyes were glued to that man, the wedding groom, whom she was sure was her husband Ricardo. But how was that possible? She herself had attended the funeral, had cried his death, had said goodbye. How was he now alive and well? No, this can't be. Is this some kind of joke? Jessica muttered to herself, her mind racing. She felt her legs tremble and her body go cold. It was as if all the air had disappeared from her lungs. She simply couldn't believe what her eyes were seeing. "Ricardo! My God, is that really you?" she whispered, her voice faltering. Memories of the day of the accident invaded her mind, the tears threatening to stream down her face. That had been the worst pain she had ever felt in her life. And now, seeing him there, so close, was too much to bear. Jessica looked around, desperate, trying to understand what was happening. How could he be alive? Why was he pretending to be another man? Was it just a cruel coincidence? She gathered all her willpower not to run to his table and demand explanations. But she knew she couldn't make a scene, not in front of all those guests. She would have to think of something, some way to get to him without drawing attention. "Calm down, Jessica. You need to keep your composure. You can't do anything now," she scolded herself, taking a deep breath. But it was almost impossible. Her husband, the man she had mourned for years, was there, just a few feet away. And she needed to know the truth. Jessica couldn't take her eyes off Samuel, the supposed groom. She needed to talk to him, understand what was going on. That man was her husband Ricardo, she was sure of it. But why was he pretending to be someone else? Driven by urgency, Jessica began to approach the table where Samuel was sitting, chatting animatedly with the guests. She could barely think, her heart beating out of control. "I need to get close to him, I need to understand what's going on," she thought, determined. But when Jessica was just a few feet from the table, 2 large and imposing security guards blocked her path. "Excuse me, ma'am, but access to this area is restricted to invited guests only," said one of them, raising his hand to prevent her from advancing. Jessica stopped, confused and frustrated. "But I need to talk to the groom." "It's an emergency," she insisted, trying to get around them. The security guards, however, did not move. I'm sorry, but I can't let you through. It's the event manager's orders, said the other security guard, crossing his arms. Jessica felt the anger rising in her body. She couldn't believe she was being prevented from getting close to Ricardo. She needed to talk to him, understand what was happening. Please, you have to let me through. This man. He's my husband. I need to know what's going on, she pleaded, desperate. But the security guards remained firm, blocking her path. Jessica found herself unable to reach Samuel, her heart filling with frustration and despair. She needed a plan, but at the moment all she could think about was reuniting with her beloved Ricardo. As Jessica stood there, trying to deal with the situation, her mind began to wander through time. Images of her wedding to Ricardo invaded her head, making her heart tighten even more. She remembered that day so well. Ricardo was handsome in his dark suit, his bright smile illuminating his face. And Jessica, radiant in her white dress, could barely contain her joy. They loved each other so much, they were so happy together. I accept you, Ricardo, to be my husband. To love and respect, in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty, until death do us part, Jessica had repeated those words with so much emotion. And Ricardo had done the same, his eyes shining with happiness. They kissed under applause and tears of joy. That had been the happiest day of their lives. Jessica also remembered the nights when they simply hugged on the couch, talking about their dreams and plans for the future. Ricardo always made her laugh with his silly jokes, but she loved every moment by his side. You are the woman of my life, Jessica. I don't know what I would do without you, he used to say, caressing her face with affection. And then, that terrible accident. Jessica couldn't forget the pain she felt when she received the news. She cried for days, feeling completely lost without her beloved. Now, seeing him there, so close, seemed like a dream. A dream she could barely believe was real. Ricardo. Jessica murmured, feeling the tears stream down her face. She needed to understand what was happening. Her heart was on edge, full of hope and fear at the same time. Jessica couldn't take her eyes off Samuel, the supposed groom. That man was Ricardo, she was sure of it. But how? Why was he pretending to be someone else? She needed to find out the truth. Discreetly, Jessica began to observe Samuel closely, looking for any detail that might give her a clue. She noticed that he seemed a bit nervous, looking away every time she stared at him. There's something wrong with this guy. I know there is, Jessica thought, determined to find out what was going on. She took advantage of serving the table where Samuel was sitting to try to overhear any conversation that might give her a clue. So, Samuel, is everything ready for the big celebration? One of the groom's friends asked, smiling. Oh, yes, of course. I can't wait to marry my beloved, Samuel replied, sounding a bit forced. You seem different today, man. Any problems? Another man questioned, noticing Samuel's agitation. No, everything's fine. I'm just a little nervous, you know how it is, Samuel covered up, giving an awkward laugh. Jessica observed each word and reaction attentively. Something was definitely not right. This man didn't seem at all like the husband she knew. Discreetly, she approached the table, pretending to clear the plates. Her eyes scanned every detail, looking for something that might give her a clue about Samuel's past. That's when she noticed something in his pocket, a small folded piece of paper. Jessica felt her heart racing. Could there be important information there? She needed to access that paper, but she knew she couldn't just take it. She would have to wait for the right moment and be very careful not to draw attention. Jessica knew she was racing against time. She needed to uncover the truth about Samuel as soon as possible. After all, this man could be her beloved Ricardo, and she couldn't waste this chance to reunite with him. As soon as Jessica had some free time, she ran out of the event hall, in search of a quieter place. She had to talk to her family about what she had just witnessed. Jessica quickly dialed her sister Luisa's number, who answered concerned. "Jessica. What's wrong? You sound distressed," her sister said on the other end of the line. "Luisa, you're not going to believe what I saw here," Jessica said, her voice trembling. "It's Ricardo, Luisa. My husband Ricardo, he's alive." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" "That's impossible, Jessica. We buried Ricardo years ago," Luisa responded, shocked. I know. But he's here, at the wedding." Disguised as the groom, Samuel, Jessica explained, almost out of breath. "My God, this can't be true. How can it be him?" her sister exclaimed, her voice faltering. The two sisters remained silent for a few seconds, trying to process this surprising information. "What are you going to do, Jessica? Are you going to confront him?" Luisa asked, hesitantly. Jessica sighed deeply. "I don't know, Luisa. I don't know what to do. I'm completely lost. All I know is that I need to find out the truth, no matter what it costs." "I understand, Jessica. We're here with you, whatever happens." "You're not alone in this," her sister said, in a comforting tone. Jessica felt her eyes fill with tears. Knowing that her family was supporting her in this confusing moment was exactly what she needed. "Thank you, Luisa. I'll try to find out what's going on. I need to confront this Samuel guy and demand answers," Jessica declared, determined. She took a deep breath, knowing she would have to go back to the hall and face this unexpected situation. But with the support of her family, Jessica knew she could do it. After the conversation with her sister Luisa, Jessica knew she had to act. She couldn't just let this situation pass. That man, Samuel, was her husband Ricardo, she was sure of it. And she needed to find out the truth, even if it meant risking her job. Jessica took a deep breath and started to formulate a plan in her head. She knew she couldn't just approach Samuel and confront him in front of all the guests. That would certainly cause a scandal and she would probably end up losing her job. "No, I have to be more cautious," Jessica thought, biting her lower lip. "I need an opportunity, a moment when I can talk to him alone." She began to observe Samuel's movements, looking for an opening. He seemed to always be accompanied by his friends and family, never alone. "Damn, how am I going to get close to him?" Jessica complained, frustrated. That's when she had an idea. Maybe if she pretended to need help with something at work, she could approach Samuel and have a chance to confront him. "Yes, that's it," Jessica exclaimed, excited about her plan. She quickly went to one of the security guards who was nearby. "Excuse me, could you help me with something? I need to remove some plates from the groom's table, but it seems I have my hands full," Jessica said, in a polite tone. The security guard looked at her with suspicion, but then nodded and accompanied her to Samuel's table. "Here, let me help you," he offered, extending his hands to take the plates. Jessica took advantage of the opportunity and, discreetly, approached Samuel. "I need to talk to you. Now. It's about your past," she whispered urgently, looking him in the eye. Samuel seemed surprised and a bit scared. Jessica saw in his gaze that her suspicions were correct. This man was hiding something. Jessica felt her heart racing in her chest. She had finally managed to approach Samuel, the supposed groom, and demand answers. But now, with him standing in front of her, visibly nervous, Jessica didn't know exactly what to do. "So, what do you mean by my past?" Samuel asked, trying to hide his discomfort. Jessica stared at him firmly, without breaking eye contact. "You know very well what I'm talking about, Samuel. Or should I say, Ricardo," she said, seeing the man's face turn pale. Ricardo. What are you talking about?" Samuel stammered, his hands trembling. Jessica didn't respond immediately. She looked around, making sure no one was paying attention to them at that moment. Then, with determination, she took the microphone that one of the waiters was carrying and climbed onto one of the tables. Excuse me," she shouted, drawing the attention of all the guests. The murmurs and background music ceased, and all eyes turned to Jessica. She could feel Samuel's eyes piercing her, begging her not to do this. "My name is Jessica, and I have a revelation to make to all of you," Jessica began, her voice firm. "This man you know as Samuel, the groom, is not who he claims to be." A murmur of surprise swept through the audience. Some guests exchanged confused looks, while others watched Jessica with curiosity. "This man is, in fact, my husband. Ricardo. The one you all believed to have died years ago in a car accident," Jessica continued, feeling the tears streaming down her face. A heavy silence fell over the hall. All eyes turned to Samuel, who was visibly disturbed, his face as pale as wax. That's not true," he shouted, desperate. "I'm not this so-called Ricardo." But Jessica didn't give in. She knew, with absolute certainty, that this man was her beloved husband. And she was determined to prove it, no matter the cost. Samuel, or rather, Ricardo, was completely stunned. He had not expected Jessica to confront him in this way, in front of all the wedding guests. "That's not true. I'm not this Ricardo you're talking about," he insisted, in a desperate tone. Jessica looked at him firmly, holding the microphone tightly. "Don't give me lies, Ricardo. I recognized you the moment I saw you. You are my husband, the father of my children." "Don't try to deny it," she countered, her voice choked with emotion. Ricardo lowered his head, seeming defeated. He knew there was no way to escape this situation. All right. "You're right," he murmured, raising his gaze. "I am the Ricardo, your husband. But I can no longer be that person." Jessica felt a tightness in her chest upon hearing those words. What did he mean by that? "I don't understand, Ricardo." "What do you mean? Why are you pretending to be another man?" she questioned, confused. Ricardo sighed heavily, running his hands through his hair. I didn't die in that car accident, Jessica. I faked my own death to escape a debt with the mafia. They wanted to kill me, I had no choice but to disappear," he explained, his voice trembling. A murmur of shock swept through the audience. All the guests seemed to be absorbing this shocking revelation. Mafia? Debt? Ricardo, what have you done? Jessica exclaimed, feeling her head spinning. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her husband, the man she loved, had lied about his own death and become another person. All because of problems with criminals. I know. It was the worst decision of my life, Ricardo admitted, desperately grabbing Jessica's arm. But I had to save myself, Jessica. I couldn't leave you and the children with nothing. Tears streamed down Jessica's face as she listened to this unexpected explanation. Her world had been completely turned upside down. "So you abandoned us? You let us mourn your death for years?" she questioned, her voice choked. Ricardo lowered his gaze, unable to look at her. I had no choice. "I'm so sorry, Jessica. I'm so sorry," he murmured, the guilt evident on his face. As Ricardo revealed the truth, the event hall exploded in murmurs and exclamations of surprise. All the guests seemed shocked by these unexpected revelations. "So you didn't die in that accident? And you faked your own death?" Jessica questioned, still incredulous. Ricardo nodded, with a look of deep regret. "Yes, that's what I did. I was involved with the mafia and they wanted to kill me because of a debt I had. I had no other choice but to fake my own death and disappear," he explained, his voice trembling. Jessica felt a lump in her throat upon hearing this. So all that suffering, all the tears she had shed, were for nothing. Ricardo had abandoned her because of problems with criminals. "But why did you come back now? And why are you posing as another man?" she asked, confused. Ricardo hesitated for a moment, looking even more disturbed. I came back to get married. This was my chance to start a new life, a life away from the mafia. I needed a false identity to do that," he responded, avoiding her gaze. Jessica felt a chill run down her body. So Ricardo had planned to marry another woman, while she and her children were devastated by his supposed death. "You were going to marry someone else, while I and the children were distraught over your death," she exclaimed, her voice choked with pain and anger. Ricardo lowered his head, unable to look at her. I had no choice, Jessica. I needed to start my life over somehow," he murmured, almost in a whisper. At that moment, one of the guests stood up and began pointing at Jessica and Ricardo. "Wait a minute, is this some kind of scam? This guy isn't the groom, is that true?" he shouted, drawing everyone's attention. Soon, the entire audience began to stand up, outraged, as the event's security guards approached, clearly confused by the situation. Jessica knew this was just the beginning. More revelations and confusion were to come. Everything was crumbling before her eyes, and she didn't know what to expect anymore. As the security guards and some of the guests began to approach, confused and outraged by the unfolding scene, Jessica knew she had to act quickly. "Call the police. This man is an imposter," a guest shouted, pointing accusingly at Ricardo. Jessica turned to Ricardo, her eyes full of tears. "What have you done, Ricardo? Why did you lie to all of us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ricardo lowered his head, seeming defeated. "I had no choice, Jessica. I had to do this to save myself from the mafia," he murmured. At that moment, the sound of sirens echoed through the hall, and soon the police entered the room, pushing through the curious crowd. "What's going on here?" one of the officers asked, staring at Ricardo and Jessica. "This man is an imposter. He's not the groom, Samuel, but rather Ricardo, my husband who everyone believed was dead," Jessica explained, pointing at Ricardo. The police immediately approached Ricardo, handcuffing him. "Sir, you are being arrested on suspicion of fraud and ideological falsehood. Please come with us to the police station for further questioning," the officer announced, firmly. Ricardo did not resist, he only looked at Jessica with a distressed gaze. "Jessica, please, listen to me. I had no choice, I had to do this," he pleaded, as he was led away by the police. Jessica watched the scene, feeling completely lost. All of this seemed like a nightmare. She still could hardly believe that her husband, whose death she had mourned for years, had been alive the whole time. The police began to interrogate the guests, trying to better understand what had happened. They needed to unravel the whole truth about Ricardo's past and what led him to assume a false identity. Jessica knew that now she could only wait and see where this investigation would lead. She needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The police investigation during the wedding turned out to be a real puzzle. All the guests were interrogated, and gradually Ricardo's story began to unfold. "So, you're telling me that this man, who was posing as Samuel, is actually your husband, Ricardo, whom you believe to be dead?" the detective questioned Jessica, diligently taking notes in his notebook. Jessica nodded, still stunned by it all. "Yes, he even admitted it. He said he had faked his own death to escape problems with the mafia," she explained, her voice trembling. The detective shook his head, impressed. "This is very serious. So this Ricardo assumed a false identity and planned to marry this other woman?" he asked. "Yes, he said he needed a new life, away from the mafia. And that this was his chance to start over," Jessica responded, feeling the tears welling up in her eyes again. The detective made some notes and then turned to talk to another officer. Jessica watched them, anxious for answers. After a few minutes, the detective returned, his expression serious. "Well, Mr. Ricardo, or rather, Samuel, has confessed everything. He was, in fact, involved with the mafia and had a considerable debt with them. That's why he orchestrated this plan to fake his own death and assume a new identity," he explained. Jessica felt a lump in her throat. So all of this was true. Her husband had really abandoned her all these years. But why did he come back now? And why plan to marry another woman? She questioned, her voice choked. The detective sighed deeply. According to him, this was his chance to start over. He wanted to marry this wealthy bride in order to finally get rid of his problems with the mafia and live peacefully. But, of course, it was all just a fraud scheme, he explained. Jessica felt the anger boiling in her chest. How could Ricardo do this to her and their children? She needed to confront him, she needed to understand all the details of this story. "Where is he now?" "I need to talk to him," Jessica said, determined. The detective nodded, understanding. "He was taken to the police station. You can accompany him, if you wish. But be prepared, this conversation will not be easy at all," he warned. Jessica took a deep breath and followed the detective, ready to face her husband and demand answers. She needed to understand everything that had happened, even if it broke her heart. Jessica followed the detective to the police station, where Ricardo, or rather, Samuel, was being interrogated. She knew she had to confront him, to understand everything that had happened. When Jessica entered the room, Ricardo looked at her with a mixture of regret and despair. "Jessica, I know you must be furious with me, and rightfully so," he began, his voice trembling. "But please, let me explain." Jessica crossed her arms, her eyes flashing with anger. "Explain. Do you think you can just give me an explanation and everything will be all right?" she retorted, her voice laden with hurt. "You abandoned us, Ricardo. You made us mourn your supposed death for years." Ricardo lowered his head, seeming ashamed. I know. And there's no excuse for that. But I really had no choice," he tried to justify. "Those mafia guys, they were going to kill me. I had to disappear to save myself." Jessica shook her head, incredulous. "And why did you come back now? Why plan to marry another woman?" she questioned, feeling the tears streaming down her face. Ricardo looked at her, his eyes gleaming with remorse. I needed to start my life over. This was my chance to escape it all, to have a new identity. I never imagined I'd find you here, he explained, his voice strained. So you were going to marry this woman, while I and the children continued to suffer from your supposed death? Jessica shouted, the anger overflowing. Ricardo couldn't look at her. I know, Jessica. I know there's no justification for this. I've done horrible things, I've betrayed you and our children. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he admitted, defeated. Jessica felt her heart break. After so many years of suffering, she finally had her husband back. But at the same time, she couldn't forgive him for everything he had done. How could you do this to me, Ricardo? To our family? She questioned, her voice choked with pain. Ricardo looked at her, his eyes welling up. I don't know, Jessica. I was desperate, I couldn't think straight. I just wanted to save myself, even if it meant losing everything I loved most, he admitted, the guilt evident on his face. Jessica remained silent for a few moments, trying to process all of this. Her heart fought between anger and longing, between disappointment and hope. Finally, she looked up, meeting Ricardo's gaze with determination. So is that it, Ricardo? Are you willing to betray us, to save your own skin? She questioned, her voice firm. Ricardo lowered his head, unable to respond. Jessica remained silent for a few moments, her heart struggling between anger and longing. She had her husband back, but at the same time, she couldn't forgive him for the lies and abandonment. So is that it, Ricardo? Are you willing to betray us, to save your own skin? She questioned, her voice firm. Ricardo lowered his head, unable to respond. Jessica could see the guilt etched on his face. I don't know what to do, Jessica. I've done horrible things, I know that. But I just wanted a chance to start over, he murmured, his voice strained. Jessica felt a lump in her throat. This man, her beloved husband, had lied and abandoned them for years. She didn't know if she could ever trust him again. And what did you expect, Ricardo? That I and the children would simply accept all of this and welcome you back with open arms? She questioned, the hurt evident in her tone. Ricardo looked at her, his eyes glistening with tears. No, I didn't expect that. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Jessica. But I just wanted a chance to explain, to try to fix everything I've done wrong, he pleaded, his voice trembling. Jessica felt her heart tightening. She wanted to believe him, wanted to give him another chance. But at the same time, the wounds of the past were still so raw. And the children, Ricardo? Do you know how much they suffered with your supposed death? Jessica questioned, her voice laden with emotion. Ricardo lowered his gaze, the guilt evident on his face. I know, Jessica. I know I was selfish and that I caused so much suffering to all of you. And there's nothing I can do to fix that, he admitted, his voice strained. Jessica took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. She knew she had to make a decision, but it was so difficult. I need time, Ricardo. I need to think about all of this, she said, feeling the tears streaming down her face. Ricardo looked at her, the hope shining in his eyes. All right, Jessica. I understand. Just tell me if you can forgive me one day, he murmured. Jessica averted her gaze, unable to respond. She knew this would not be an easy decision, but she needed to consider all the consequences of her actions. After the tumultuous confrontation between Jessica and Ricardo at the police station, the news quickly spread through the reception hall. The guests were shocked and outraged at the revelation that the groom, Samuel, was actually Jessica's supposedly deceased husband. I can't believe this is happening. This wedding is a fraud, exclaimed one of the guests, indignantly. Another man approached Jessica, eyeing her with suspicion. So this whole story was a scam. You two were trying to deceive us, he accused, pointing his finger at her. Jessica raised her hands, trying to calm the situation. No, it's not like that at all. I was also a victim of this deception, she explained, her voice trembling. But the guests seemed incredulous and angry. Soon, the entire hall descended into chaos, with shouts and complaints. At that moment, the event manager approached, visibly distraught. What's going on here? Who authorized this commotion? He asked, looking at Jessica and the others involved. This wedding is a fraud. This man is not who he claims to be, one of the security guards explained, pointing to the area where Ricardo was being detained. The manager seemed dazed by the news. What? But how is that possible? He exclaimed, running his hands through his hair. Soon, the police arrived at the scene, taking control of the situation. The wedding needed to be definitively cancelled due to all the surprising revelations. Jessica watched everything, feeling completely lost. Her world had been turned upside down in just a few hours. She didn't know what to do, or how to react to everything that had happened. The bride, Isabella, also observed the scene, devastated. Her dream wedding had been completely ruined by this unexpected chaos. Jessica approached her, feeling a twinge of empathy. I'm so sorry for all of this, Isabella. I never wanted you to go through this, she said, her voice gentle. Isabella looked at her, her eyes welling up. I can't believe I was deceived in this way. My wedding ruined because of this man's lie, she murmured, the disappointment evident on her face. Jessica squeezed the bride's hand, trying to comfort her. I know. But you're not to blame for any of this. This is the consequence of Ricardo's actions, she said, with empathy. Isabella nodded, seeming a little calmer. She knew that, in the end, the blame was only on Ricardo and his web of lies. As the police finalized the procedures, Jessica watched everything happening, trying to process what had become her life in just a few hours. She didn't know what the future had in store for her, but one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. After the tumultuous conclusion of the wedding, Jessica approached the bride, Isabella, who seemed devastated by all the chaos. I'm so sorry for all of this, Isabella. I never wanted you to go through this, Jessica said, her voice gentle and full of empathy. Isabella looked at her, her eyes welling up. I can't believe I was deceived in this way. My wedding ruined because of this man's lie, she murmured, the disappointment evident on her face. Jessica squeezed the bride's hand, trying to comfort her. I know. But you're not to blame for any of this. This is the consequence of Ricardo's actions, she explained, with understanding. Isabella nodded, seeming a little calmer. She knew that, in the end, the blame was only on Ricardo and his web of lies. I feel so foolish. I really believed he was the right man for me, Isabella confessed, her voice strained. Jessica squeezed her hand with care. Don't blame yourself, Isabella. You had no way of knowing the truth. He deceived all of us, she said, trying to comfort her. Isabella sighed deeply. I just wish things had been different. This was my dream wedding, she lamented, her shoulders slumped. Jessica enveloped her in a comforting hug, feeling the young bride's pain. I know, my dear. But you'll get through this. You're strong, and you'll rebuild your life, Jessica whispered, in a soothing tone. Isabella returned the hug, letting the tears roll down her face. Thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate your support in this difficult time, she murmured. Jessica smiled with empathy, caressing Isabella's hair. You're not alone. We'll get through this together, she assured, determined to help the young woman recover from this trauma. In that moment, Jessica knew that, despite all the confusion and pain they had faced, she and Isabella could become great friends. After all, they shared a unique experience that united them in this delicate moment. A few years had passed since that tumultuous wedding. Jessica and Isabella, who had met amidst all the chaos, had become very close friends. So, Jessica, are you ready for another adventure? Isabella asked, a sparkle in her eyes. Jessica smiled, excited. Of course. Where do you want to go this time? She inquired, adjusting the backpack on her shoulders. The two women had developed a strong and meaningful friendship after the wedding incident. They understood each other in a unique way, having gone through such similar experiences. How about a trip to Europe? I've heard Italy is an incredible place to visit, Isabella suggested, the enthusiasm evident in her voice. Jessica nodded, excited. Rome, Venice, Florence. I've always wanted to see those places. Let's make it an unforgettable trip, she exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. The two friends laughed, already starting to plan the details of their next adventure. After everything they had been through, they deserved a little fun and freedom. You know, Jessica, I never imagined I would become so close to you. You were a true friend when I needed it most, Isabella said, with sincerity. Jessica smiled, holding her friend's hand. And I never imagined I would find someone as amazing as you, Isabella. You were my light in those dark moments, she responded, with affection. The two women embraced, emotional. They had been through so much together, since that fateful wedding, and now they were ready to live new adventures and make the most of life. Well, what are we waiting for? Let's catch that plane and have a great time on this trip. Isabella exclaimed, excited. Jessica laughed, nodding in agreement. Yes, let's go. This is going to be the best trip of our lives, she affirmed, enthusiastically. The two friends walked towards the airport, ready to embark on a new journey, leaving behind the pains of the past and embracing the future with optimism and determination.